Okay, so get this. Imagine a world where the laws are like literally carved in stone, right? Out in the open for everyone to say.
Wow.
That's what we're diving into today.
Okay.
Hammurabi's Code,
I like it.
a legal text that's almost 4,000 years old. We've got excerpts from Wikipedia articles on the code itself, and Hammurabi, the Babylonian king behind it all.
It's fascinating to think about how that public display, having those laws right there for everyone to see, how that would shape people's understanding of like justice back then.
Totally.
Huh.
So to kick things off, let's get some historical context. Who was this Hammurabi guy?
Yeah.
And what was the word like when he came to power?
All right. Well, picture Mesopotamia around 1792 to 1750 BC. It was, well, a pretty chaotic time, honestly. The whole region was fractured into all these like warring city-states, constantly fighting each other for resources, for dominance, the whole shebang. It was. And that's where Hammurabi enters the scene. He was a real force to be reckoned with. Through a mix of military power, making strategic alliances, and let's be honest, probably some pretty savvy maneuvering behind the scenes, he managed to unify Mesopotamia under his rule. It was quite a feat.
So he was a real power player.
Oh, yeah,
Clearly ambitious.
definitely.
But the sources mention something about his personal letters surviving to this day.
They do.
That's got to be incredibly rare for a figure from that era.
It is. It is. We actually have over 50 of Hammurabi's letters, which is remarkable when you think about it. And now they offer this amazing kind of glimpse into his day-to-day life, his concerns. Like we see him dealing with things like floods, adjusting the calendar, even overseeing these massive herds of livestock. It's like it really humanizes him. Seeing a king wrestle with these like very practical, very human matters is pretty cool.
It's almost like peeking behind the curtain, right? At the daily grind of this ancient ruler. Okay, so let's talk about the code itself. We're not just talking about some like dusty old scroll here, right?
Oh, no, 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 no.
This is a legit stone monument.
You got it. It's inscribed on this massive basalt steel. It's over 7 feet tall.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty impressive. It was discovered in modern-day Iran back in 1901, and now it has a pretty fancy home. It resides in the Louvre Museum.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fitting home for such a historically significant document. And it's not just that it's old. The sources point out that the code's structure and content are surprisingly sophisticated for its time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is one of the oldest surviving legal texts that we have, but it goes way beyond just a list of rules.
Okay.
The code lays out this like surprisingly comprehensive system covering what we'd recognize today as criminal law, family law, and property law, even regulations for professions like doctors and builders. It's pretty amazing.
Wow, that's pretty forward thinking for something from nearly 4,000 years ago.
It is.
But I'm guessing it wasn't all like sunshine and rainbows back then.
No.
The sources hinted at some pretty harsh punishments.
That's right. The code definitely emphasizes punishment, often based on the eye for an eye principle, which we'll definitely explore further, later on. Before we get to those specifics, I think it's important to understand the social context at the time. The code makes a really clear distinction between 3 social classes, each with its own set of rights and penalties.
Okay, so break down this social hierarchy for me. Who were the top dogs? Who were the underdogs? And how did this play into the code's framework?
All right, so at the top you had the Awilum. This was the elite class, often translated as gentlemen. Then you had the Mushonim, the commoners, the everyday folks, and finally you had the Ordibamtu, the slaves, who faced the harshest penalties under the code.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty clear that Babylonian society was highly stratified. But what's interesting is that while the code lays out these seemingly like rigid categories, it also suggests some fluidity within them.
That's interesting. So even within those like broad categories, there were nuances in how people were treated.
Exactly. For example, laws 200 and 202, they kind of suggest varying levels of status, even within the Awilan class, with some individuals potentially holding more power and influence than others. So it hints at this more complex social structure than just a simple, noble versus commoner kind of dichotomy.
That definitely adds another layer to our understanding. Now, here's a question that popped into my mind as we were discussing all this. We have this incredibly detailed legal document, but how do we know if it was actually put into practice? Was it like a constitution strictly enforced or more of a theoretical guideline?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's one that scholars are still debating to this day.
Oh, wow.
Some believe that it reflects actual enforceable law, while others suggest it might have served more as a record of past judgments, or perhaps even as a kind of legal textbook, like
Yep.
laying out principles and hypothetical cases for future judges and legal thinkers.
So it might not have been about like literal day-to-day enforcement, but rather shaping the legal mindset of the time.
That's one possibility, yeah.
Right.
And it's made even more intriguing by the code. It's unique structure. It's organized almost formulaic presentation. It actually mirrors other Babylonian intellectual works, particularly omen lists, which were essentially these elaborate catalogs of signs and their interpretations.
So the code's format suggests a link to Babylonian, what is it, list science.
With science, yeah.
Which raises some interesting questions about how they approached knowledge and categorization back then.
Exactly. The code's use of this list science logic, with its if-then structure for each law, it could actually indicate a broader intellectual trend in Babylonian thought, like where knowledge was organized and presented in this systematic, almost algorithmic way.
Mm-hmm.
It opens up this whole new avenue of inquiry into how the code fits into the larger intellectual landscape of ancient Babylon. It's really fascinating.
It's like we're uncovering not just a legal document, but like a window into their entire way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Did this code have any influence beyond ancient Babylon? Did it leave a mark on legal systems we might know today?
Well, its influence is undeniable. For one thing, it was copied and studied for over 1,000 years.
Wow.
Yeah, making it a cornerstone of Mesopotamian legal tradition. And then there's the question of its potential influence on the Mosaic Law found in the Bible.
Oh, just
There are some striking similarities between the two, which have fueled scholarly debate for centuries. Did Hammurabi's code in some way shape those laws? It's a question with some pretty profound implications.
wow. So we're talking potential influence on one of the most influential legal and religious texts in history. That's a pretty significant legacy.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Direct influence on modern law is harder to pinpoint. But Hammurabi's code is still studied and referenced today, which shows its enduring relevance. It offers this captivating glimpse into a society grappling with issues of justice, social order, and power dynamics that are surprisingly relevant to our own world.
Speaking of relevance, we touched on some of the eye-opening punishments earlier. I'm ready to hear more about those. What are some of the most striking examples you came across in your deep dive?
We'll buckle up because some of these are going to sound pretty intense by today's standards. But before we jump into those specifics, I think let's take a closer look at the principle that underpins many of them. The infamous eye for an eye concept. That's where we'll pick things up in part 2 of our deep dive into Hammurabi's code. Welcome back. So as promised, let's delve into the heart of Hammurabi's code, the concept of an eye for an eye. It's not just a catchy phrase. It's really woven throughout the entire text.
I'm all ears. It's easy to throw that phrase around, but seeing how it actually played out in their legal system, that's got to be eye-opening. Pun intended.
Oh, absolutely. And it's laid out, quite literally in many of the laws. For instance, Law 196 states that if a man destroys the eye of another man, his own eye shall be destroyed.
No room for interpretation there.
Whoop.
It was about like exacting equal retribution, a very physical tit-for-tat approach.
Precisely. And this principle extended beyond just physical injuries. Law 200, for example, applies the same logic to teeth.
Okay.
Knock out someone's tooth, you lose one of your own.
It makes you wonder about the dental practices of the time. Ouch.
Yeah.
But did this eye for an eye concept apply to other situations as well, beyond those kind of straightforward cases of physical harm?
Yes, it did. Law 229, for example, addresses what happens if a house collapses and kills the homeowner. The penalty. The builder's put to death.
Wow. So they held builders to a pretty high standard.
Yeah.
I guess shoddy construction wasn't tolerated back then.
Not at all. And it gets even more intense. Law 230 states that if the house collapse kills the homeowner's son, then the builder's son is put to death.
That's intense. Extending the punishment to the next generation feels incredibly severe from our modern perspective.
It does. It really highlights this concept of family responsibility.
Yeah.
or perhaps even a belief in inherited guilt, which is something we don't really grapple with in the same way today. But it certainly underscores the profound consequences of negligence under this code.
It also makes me think back to that social hierarchy we discussed earlier. Did this eye for an eye principle apply equally across all social classes?
That's a good point, and the answer is no. While the concept is central to the code, the punishments varied significantly depending on your social standing. Remember those three distinct groups: the Awelum, the Mushonim, and the Wardamamtu?
Right. The elite, the commoners, and the slaves. So I'm guessing a slave who injured a member of the Owalam class would face a much harsher punishment than if the situation were reversed.
Absolutely. Yeah. If a commoner or Mushonim assaulted a higher ranking Awilum, the consequences would be far, far more severe than if the roles were flipped. It all comes back to that core principle we discussed earlier: maintaining social order and reinforcing the existing power structure.
So while an eye for an eye sounds straightforward, it was actually applied very selectively. The scales of justice were definitely weighted in favor of those at the top of the social pyramid.
That's a great observation. It's a reminder that legal systems, even those striving for fairness, often reflect the inherent inequalities of the society they govern. But it's not all about harsh punishments and social stratification. There are also glimmers of legal concepts in the code that resonate with our modern sensibilities.
Really? Give me an example. What kind of ideas from Hammurabi's code might we still recognize today?
Well, take the concept of presumption of innocence, for example. The very first two laws of the code address false accusations, and the punishments they outline are designed to deter people from making claims without solid evidence. It's like they built in a mechanism to prevent people from being wrongly accused and punished.
So right from the start, the code emphasizes the importance of proving your case,
Yes.
of having evidence to back up your claims. It's not just a free-for-all of accusations.
Exactly. And there's a clear appreciation for written evidence throughout the code.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to contracts and agreements. Remember those cuneiform tablets we talked about?
Right. The clay tablets with their wedge-shaped markings, they weren't just for record keeping. They played a key role in their legal system.
Precisely. They served as crucial documentation, helping to prevent disputes and ensure fairness in business dealings. It's like their version of a legally binding contract.
So even within this seemingly harsh legal system, there were safeguards in place to protect individuals and their rights.
There were.
It's not as black and white as it might seem at first glance.
That's the beauty of diving deep into these historical texts. They challenge our assumptions and reveal the complexities of the past. And speaking of complexity, let's revisit that ongoing debate about the code's overall purpose. Last time you mentioned that scholars are still grappling with whether it was a set of laws and the way we understand them today. Did your deep dive shed any new light on this question?
Well, as we discussed earlier, there's that argument from silence, the fact that the code isn't directly referenced in other Babylonian legal documents.
Right.
It makes you wonder about its practical application.
That's a key piece of the puzzle. But even if it wasn't a strict legal code in the way we might think of it, there are other equally fascinating possibilities. One theory gaining traction is that the code was more of a scholarly treatise, a work of legal philosophy intended to guide judges and legal thinkers, to provide them with a framework for approaching complex cases.
So maybe more like a reference guide, a collection of legal precedents, or even a teaching tool for shaping the legal minds of the time.
Exactly. And this interpretation makes sense when you consider the code's remarkable structure, its meticulous organization and consistency in format. Each law is presented as a hypothetical case that if-then structure we discussed earlier, followed by a prescribed judgment. It's almost like a legal algorithm, laying out a system for arriving at a just outcome.
And that format, along with the code's careful arrangement of topics, mirrors those Babylonian omen lists we talked about earlier, suggesting a connection to their broader list science approach to knowledge.
Precisely. It's like they were applying that same systematic logic, that meticulous categorization to the realm of law. Perhaps Hammurabi's goal wasn't to create a rigid set of rules to be applied uniformly, but rather to provide an intellectual framework, a guide for navigating the complexities of justice and social order.
It's almost like we're seeing the birth of legal theory, the beginnings of a society trying to grapple with abstract concepts of fairness and punishment. But let's not forget about those specific examples, those eye-catching punishments we touched on earlier. I'm ready for more.
All right. You asked for it. Get ready for some more. You won't believe they did that moments. As we delve into specific laws dealing with theft, commerce, and even marital disputes.
That's what I'm here for. Bring on the ancient Babylonian legal drama.
All right, so we've laid the groundwork, explored the social hierarchy, and even delved into that whole eye for an eye principle.
Yeah.
Now I'm ready for like the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
Hit me with some more of those specific laws and punishments that make Hammurabi's code so intriguing.
You got it. Let's start with something that's always been a big deal, theft.
Oh.
Clause 6 is pretty straightforward. If a man steals goods from a temple or a palace, he shall be put to death.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. The person who receives the stolen goods, they also get the death penalty.
Wow. No leniency there.
Nope.
It seems like they took stealing from sacred or royal property very, very seriously.
Oh, yeah.
But what about more like commonplace theft, like between individuals? How do they handle that?
Well, the code covers a range of those kinds of situations.
Okay.
For example, if someone harbors a runaway slave.
Oh, okay.
They're in big trouble.
Law 16 states that anyone who helps a slave escape shall be put to death.
That's pretty intense.
It is.
It seems like even acts of compassion, or what we might consider acts of conscience, could have dire consequences in that society.
Yeah, it really underscores just how deeply entrenched the institution of slavery was in ancient Babylon.
Right.
Helping a slave escape, that was seen as like a direct challenge to the social order, a threat to the very foundation of their society.
Right.
And speaking of challenging the social order, let's move on to business dealings.
Okay.
Did the code regulate commerce?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Trade and commerce must have been vital to their society.
Oh, absolutely.
Did they have laws governing things like contracts and business transactions?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
The code has extensive provisions covering loans, trade, even the responsibilities of innkeepers. It paints this really vivid picture of a bustling economy with a clear need for legal frameworks to govern all those interactions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For example, Law 102 deals with merchant investments.
What?
It states that if a merchant gives silver to a trading agent for a venture, and the agent suffers a loss, the agent must repay the merchant the full amount of the original investment.
That's interesting. So even back then they understood the concept of investment and risk, but it seems like the risk was borne by the agent,
yeah,
not the investor. That's a bit different from how we often think of it today.
Right. It seems they had mechanisms in place to protect investors.
Yeah.
Which suggests a desire for financial stability and a recognition of the importance of commerce to their society.
Yeah.
But while they might have been ahead of their time in some ways, let's not forget this is still a society where some pretty harsh punishments were meted out.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity.
Right.
Give me an example of one of those harsher laws related to commerce.
Well, let's look at Law 215.
Okay.
It states that if a physician treats a man for a severe wound with a bronze lancet and the man dies, or if he opens an abscess of the eye with a bronze lancet and destroys the eye, his hand shall be cut off.
Whoa, talk about accountability.
Yeah.
It seems like the stakes were incredibly high for physicians in ancient Babylon.
They were.
One wrong move and the consequences were irreversible.
Right. It highlights the weight they placed on professional competence, but it also underscores the risks inherent in medical practice, even back then.
Of course.
And speaking of risky situations, let's venture into the realm of family matters,
Okay.
specifically those messy marital disputes.
All right.
I think you'll find some of these laws particularly intriguing.
Oh, I'm all ears. Family drama is timeless, right?
It is.
What kind of situations did the code address when it came to marriage and family?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but here's a fascinating one. Law 129. It deals with adultery.
Okay.
It states that if a married woman is caught with another man, they shall both be bound and thrown into the water.
Wow, that's a pretty dramatic consequence for infidelity.
It
It definitely highlights the patriarchal nature of their society
Yeah.
and the control husbands had over their wives.
Absolutely, yeah. A woman's fidelity was paramount in their social structure, but the code wasn't entirely one-sided.
Okay.
There were some provisions that offered women a degree of protection, especially in cases of divorce.
Really? Give me an example. Did women have any legal recourse if their husbands wanted to end the marriage?
Yes, in some cases. The Law 138, for instance, states that if a man wants to divorce his wife, but she has borne him children and has been a good wife, he must return her dowry and allow her to keep custody of the children.
Okay, so there's some recognition of a woman's contributions to the family
Yeah.
and her role as a mother.
Right.
It's not all doom and gloom for women under this code.
No.
There are glimmers of fairness peeking through.
Exactly. It's a reminder that these ancient legal systems, while often harsh by our standards, we're also grappling with complex social issues and attempting to find a balance between individual rights and societal norms.
That's what makes diving deep into these historical texts so fascinating.
It is.
It's not just about learning about the past. It's about understanding the human condition, the challenges and complexities that people have faced throughout
It's like
history. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the structure and content of the code to its social and historical context. But as we wrap up our deep dive into Hammurabi's code, what's that final thought-provoking takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
Well, after all we've discussed, the punishments, the social dynamics, the attempts to create order, I keep coming back to this question.
Okay.
If you were tasked with creating a law code for today's world, what principles would you prioritize? What would your code look like? What would you keep from Hammurabi's approach, and what would you change completely? It's a challenging but incredibly relevant question, especially as we navigate the complexities of our own legal systems and strive for a more just and equitable society.
That's a great point to ponder.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate the challenges of creating a legal system that balances individual rights, societal needs, and the pursuit of justice. Food for thought indeed.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking us on this incredible journey through ancient Babylon.
You're welcome.
Until next time.